I never imagined my life would come to this. Sitting here, writing these words, I can still feel the weight of the mask I once wore, the smell of the cheap fabric, the pounding in my chest as alarms echoed through the night. People talk about crime as if it's born from greed, selfishness, or thrill-seeking. For me, it was none of those things. For me, it was love, a desperate, clawing kind of love that blinds you to reason. A love that burns so hot it sears every part of you until you're no longer yourself. Her name was Emma. To me, she wasn't just a woman. She was everything. She was the quiet mornings when the world still felt safe. She was the laughter that somehow made every broken thing inside me whole. She was the fragile hope I held onto when life threw its storms at us. And then one day, she became the patient sitting in a hospital room, her skin pale against the white sheets, her eyes filled with both strength and fear. The diagnosis was merciless, a rare, aggressive disease that seemed to devour her body with every passing week. The doctors explained treatments, numbers, clinical terms, but all I heard was the cost, the impossible, unreachable cost. Insurance covered almost nothing, the medications were experimental, and every single day felt like a ticking clock. 5 figures for a week of drugs, 6 figures for a round of therapies. I had some savings. I worked long hours. I begged banks for loans. I maxed out credit cards, but it was like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a spoon. Emma never asked me to carry this burden. If anything, she tried to stop me. She'd smile, even as pain racked her body, and tell me that my love was enough. But watching her fade, watching her lose strength, I knew love wasn't enough. Not the kind of love that sits idly by and lets the one you cherish most slip away. I began to change. My days were consumed by numbers, bills, phone calls. My nights were haunted by the sound of her breathing, labored and uneven. As she tried to sleep beside me, I would lie awake and wonder what kind of man I was, if I could call myself a man at all, if I let her suffer simply because I couldn't provide. And then came the thought, the unthinkable. At first, it was just a whisper, a shadow at the edge of my mind, a bank, a robbery, the kind of thing you read in newspapers. The kind of thing people joke about but never actually do. I pushed it away. I told myself I wasn't that kind of man. But the whisper grew louder, and louder, until it wasn't a whisper anymore. I researched everything, quietly, obsessively. I memorized layouts, security systems, guard rotations. I told myself this was just curiosity, a coping mechanism. But deep down, I knew I was building a plan. I studied masks, gloves, ways to avoid cameras. I learned how long it took for police to arrive after an alarm was triggered. Every piece of knowledge made the impossible feel more tangible. I should have felt horror at what I was doing, but all I felt was love. Every article I read, every blueprint I sketched, I did it with Emma's face in my mind. I pictured her laughing again. I pictured her walking without pain. I pictured her surviving. The night before I made my choice, she was especially weak. She tried to sit up and collapsed against me, whispering apologies, as if being sick was something to be sorry for. I held her and realized I would rather lose my freedom, my reputation, my soul itself than lose her. So I decided. It was a cold morning when I put on the mask. My hands shook as I pulled it over my face. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure it would give me away before I even stepped inside. I carried no gun. I couldn't bring myself to. I wasn't there to hurt anyone. I was there because I believed, no, I knew, it was the only way to save her. Walking into that bank was like stepping into another version of myself. I was both there and not there. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and paper. The floor tiles gleamed under the fluorescent lights. People stood in line, bored and distracted, unaware that their ordinary day was about to fracture into something unforgettable. I opened my mouth, and the words tumbled out. Words I had rehearsed 1,000 times in my head. My voice cracked, but the mask gave me strength. I demanded money, fast, no questions. I begged them not to be heroes, to stay calm, to let this end quickly. I saw fear in their eyes, but also confusion, because I didn't look or sound like the criminals they'd seen in movies. I was trembling, my words stumbling over themselves. The seconds stretched into eternities. The tellers moved quickly, their hands shaking as they stuffed bills into a bag. My vision tunneled. My ears rang. I wasn't even in that bank anymore. I was in a hospital room, holding Emma's hand, promising her it would be okay. Every moment was for her. When I finally ran out the door, the bag heavy in my hands, it felt like I was carrying not just money, but hope itself, hope with weight and shape, hope that could be cashed in for one more chance at her life. I should have felt triumph. I should have felt relief. But what I felt was terror. Every sound on the street seemed amplified. Every car engine, every footstep behind me, made my heart seize. I didn't breathe until I was home again, until the bag of stolen bills lay on the table in front of me. I stared at it for hours. It didn't look like salvation. It looked like damnation wrapped in paper and ink. But when I thought of Emma, I forced myself to believe otherwise. I told myself this wasn't crime. This wasn't theft. This was love in its rawest, most desperate form. The hospital didn't care where the money came from. They cared only that it was there. And for a moment, just a fleeting, fragile moment, it seemed like everything might be worth it. Treatments resumed. New medications. New therapies. I sat by her bedside, watching machines hum and drip, watching color return faintly to her cheeks. I dared to hope again. But hope is cruel. It builds you up only to break you harder when the truth comes crashing down. Emma smiled more those days, but it was a tired smile, the kind of smile someone wears when they're trying to protect you from the truth. Her body was too weak, the disease too relentless. The treatment slowed it, but they couldn't stop it. I watched the love of my life fade, despite everything I had sacrificed, despite everything I had risked, and I realized then that I had robbed more than a bank. I had robbed myself of illusions. I had robbed myself of peace. When Emma finally closed her eyes for the last time, the bag of money still sat half-spent in our home, a cruel reminder that no amount of stolen paper can buy back what truly matters. The day Emma died, the world went silent. I don't mean the absence of sound, I mean the kind of silence that sinks into your bones, that turns every noise hollow and meaningless. The machines in her hospital room beeped one last time, and then there was nothing. I held her hand until it grew cold, hoping somehow my warmth could call her back. But she was gone, and with her went the only reason I had for everything I'd done. I walked out of that hospital carrying nothing but grief and guilt. The stolen money sat at home, mocking me. I had risked everything to give her a chance, but in the end, I had only bought a little time. Not enough to save her. Not enough to change the ending. For days, I couldn't step into our apartment without feeling her absence pressing down on me. The blankets smelled like her. The kitchen cupboard still had her favorite teas lined up neatly. Every corner of that place was haunted by memories of a life that was supposed to continue. A life I had imagined us building together, one that had been cut short despite everything I tried. But grief wasn't the only weight I carried. There was also the robbery. The secret that hung over me like a storm cloud, ready to burst. Every knock at the door made my chest tighten. Every siren in the distance made me freeze. I lived in constant paranoia, waiting for the day when men in uniforms would break down my door and drag me away. I told myself that if it ever came to that, I'd face it. I had already lost the only person I had done it for. Nothing else mattered anymore. But part of me couldn't help hoping that somehow, the world wouldn't notice. That maybe fate would allow me this one stolen crime, this one desperate act of love, to pass unseen. For a while, it almost seemed possible. Days turned into weeks. I buried Emma quietly, with no grand ceremony, just me, a few family members, and the weight of words I couldn't say. I stood over her grave and promised her that even if the world judged me, I would never regret loving her enough to do the unthinkable. But love is not enough to erase consequences. The investigation into the bank robbery never stopped. I read the news obsessively, each article like a knife in my chest. The police were piecing things together, witness testimonies, grainy camera footage, traces left behind. I had tried so hard to plan, to be careful, but desperation makes you sloppy. And they were getting closer. The day they knocked on my door, I didn't fight. I didn't run. What was the point? Emma was gone. The only thing I had left was the truth, that I had done it for her. I lifted my hands and surrendered. The courtroom was cold. The air smelled of polished wood and old paper. Faces watched me from the benches, strangers who had come to see the criminal who thought love justified a crime. The prosecutor painted me as reckless, dangerous, selfish. My lawyer tried to argue for leniency, tried to paint the picture of a desperate man blinded by grief. But the system doesn't deal in love or heartbreak. It deals in laws, and I had broken them. When the sentence came, it didn't surprise me. Years behind bars. Years to sit and think about what I had done. Years to relive every mistake, every second, every choice that had led me here. Prison is not kind. It strips you down to your core, leaving only the raw, unvarnished truth of who you are. The walls were gray, the days monotonous. The sounds of clanging doors and distant shouts became my new soundtrack. And yet, in that cage, I found something I hadn't expected. Reflection. For the first time, I allowed myself to truly confront what I had done.